Hello, this is Gareth from Gareth on AI, and today I'm going to talk to you about a topic that's still a bit of a weakness within generative AI, within the likes of ChatGPT and Gemini, and that is the phenomenon of hallucinations. So what I'm looking to talk to you about today is what are hallucinations and what can be done to reduce the impact of them, to prevent them, if you will. So let's just start with what do you mean by hallucinations? So hallucinations are when you use a tool like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, put in a prompt about a topic where you want to find out something about it, and the response to the prompt is just fabricated, made up. It'll contain inaccurate facts and figures. It'll have made up citations, made up sources. It'll just get its facts wrong. But the scary thing about it is they look very credible. They come across very authoritative. So people have been known in the past to trust them as gospel and then use those in their work, in their day-to-day work. So it is an issue. I've experienced it firsthand. I put together over 500 product listings for a website I work on, and on those, the first drafts of it, before I finished the prompt I created, had testimonials on them, waxing lyrical about the products. And, so it would be James from Suffolk says how great the products were, and they looked very credible. But the issue had was that they were made up. They were hallucinated. They were blatantly made up. So that was my first experience of it that I was aware of, and it just made me a lot more cautious when I was using different generative AI tools. So what can you do to mitigate it is very much been on my mind, especially as I use it in my day-to-day work. And there's some numbers to back up this being a challenge. So this is from Digital Defend. It's like an education provider. And they had a really good article about hallucinations and what to do to mitigate them. And they had some good stats, such as 27% of chatbot responses contain hallucinations, 46% of generated text contain factual errors, which is terrifying. So you could be quoting those in your report, in your essays, and just undermines your credibility, really. And how is this happening? Well, people have got to realise these AI tools aren't necessarily a database. It's not working that way. The reality is it's a fancy autocomplete where it's looking for word patterns and guessing the next most likely word in a sequence. So that's why it can make mistakes. And it can be costly. So I gave the example of where I was working on an e-commerce site, and I did pick up the issues that we had, but there are examples out there. They've been in the press. There's been some things in The Guardian recently, and there's been examples in America where lawyers have faced, they've lost their cases. They've had fines because they've cited fake cases when they're defending their client, and they were generated by AI. So they're quoting things in court which have been fabricated, which undermines their credibility. There's also been examples of the James Webb Telescope. One's interesting, where there's an article people were quoting about how the James Webb Telescope could see new frontiers of the universe, which wasn't true, just been fabricated. And then there's a risk in healthcare where misdiagnosis could happen if they're looking at inappropriate treatment recommendations for an illness. So got to be careful with what you search on AI for about an illness. So, trust can be hammered. It's hard to build, it's hard to regain, it's also easy to lose if you misuse AI tools and not be wary of these hallucinations. I think getting training on this in your workplace, and I think some corporates are getting better at that now. I still think there's a bit of an education piece about being careful with the output from AI tools. So you've got to start thinking about it differently. You've got to have a different mental model. Rather than thinking of it as an oracle, an all-seeing oracle, you've got to start treating it more like a keen intern who wants to help you, really wants to get you the right answers, but will make up an answer just to make you happy, which is quite scary. So you've got to manage it. You've got to give it very hard, very specific instructions. You've got to have guardrails and checks and balances in place. So that's the way you've got to start thinking about it, rather than passively accepting the output. One way you can do that, one tactic is, I call it handing over the map. So it's a case of providing the AI tool you're working, whether it's Perplexity, ChatGPT, Gemini, whoever, rather than just asking vague questions, getting the discipline of feeding it useful information. So rather than, when you're asking it questions, rather than doing it from its own memory, it's doing it from your own sources. So, for example, a good example here in HR is rather than it just making up the facts, you provide the policy documents to the AI so it can read it, analyze it, and based on that text, give the correct answer. This is very much how I work with ChatGPT or Copilot when I'm writing product descriptions. Rather than looking for sources on the internet, I use my own product information manuals. I use our own PowerPoint slides. Anything which has been produced by a product manager is used to influence what's written in the copy. So then you're much more confident in the accuracy of the information. So that would be a tip. Feed it the correct information so you avoid the garbage in, garbage out issue. And then avoid lazy prompting. Make sure in your prompts that you're not vague. So vagueness can be quite damaging. So again, providing good quality content. So if you've got transcripts or annual reports, get it to quote off those rather than just from its own sort of data. Also, ask it to not invent things. Ask it to say it doesn't know. List its assumptions. Ask it not to guess. So it's all these sort of things. Ask it not to make things up. So it's that sort of angle as well. So use those sort of mental thinking when you're putting together your prompts. Yeah, and also give it a persona. So this is a good one here, which is have the I don't know clause in there. Get it to be comfortable to say I don't know. Put in the prompt, if you do not know the answer, say so. And also ask it to be a careful, like a librarian, to assign it a persona. So it's less creative. It just uses facts and figures rather than making things up. So it's all the aggregate of all these little things can help with the accuracy of what your output's going to be. Then you put up your no improvisation signs. So don't assume it knows your standards. Give it your standards. So if you ask it to write copy, a good example of this within marketing is give it your style guidelines. Or if you're writing copy for another client, make sure you've got their style guidelines. If it's within something like financial services, if it's insurance, make sure it's familiar with the insurance code of business. If it's within the construction industry, all of these different industries have got their own things like words to avoid. You can load those in so that it makes sure it writes the content, knowing that, factoring those documents in there. Asking not to make examples, as I said earlier. And yeah, I think it's, again, the theme that's coming out of this tonight, hopefully, is that it's all about what you provide it. It's that garbage in, garbage out principle. You set really clear constraints. And this goes back to days in school when you used to do maths, where the teacher would ask you to think about your workings out on your sums. So have this what's called chain of thought prompting. So rather than asking in one prompt to get the answer, get in the habit of it breaking the answer out. So ask it to provide the analysis, the reasoning, cited sources, cited assumptions to get to the answer that it's got to. So if it's a complex topic, so ask it to break it out in that way to force it to think out loud. So I think that's another thing I've used, is to say cite your sources is one of my favourite ones to use, to make sure you're confident that what it's saying is quoted from credible sources. And then this again, retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. This is fantastic as well. This is again used if companies use Copilot are good with this, where you can have so people who've signed up to Copilot will then have access to PowerPoint, Excel documents, SharePoint, and all of these different Microsoft products to access documentation. So you see this working quite well with Copilot. Not biggest fan of Copilot myself, but this is one of the definite pluses of it, in terms of it can access documents from all over the company that you're at. Obviously, it's in a secure environment, but again, that's a good way to avoid hallucination. Is to, within Copilot, there's a web mode and an internal mode. Make sure you set it to the internal mode to get your access to internal documents. And then tactic 6, pit the LLMs against each other. So a good thing to do, and this is something I've done in the past myself, is I write something in ChatGPT and get my output. So I put my prompt into ChatGPT, get the output, and then get it reviewed either by Perplexity or Gemini. Gemini is the main one I use, more so than Perplexity, even though I know Perplexity is well regarded. But it's a good peace of mind thing. So you put in the output from ChatGPT and ask Gemini, can you fact check this information? So then you've got that extra set of eyes or digital eyes, or whatever we'll say, looking at it. And moving from digital to humans as well. We've got to remember there's humans are involved here, and you've got to think of yourself as when you're using generative AI for tasks around the quality, making sure your content's of a high standard. You still need to be an editor in chief. You still need to be really all over it, especially if it's going out to a lot of people. So never copy and paste something that you send to a client or someone, another department. Make sure you check the quotes, check the URLs, check the citations, check the dates. Have they changed? So just like you had 2 years ago, you have a bit of due diligence there. You have other people checking the work. I used to work in a department where I worked in mortgages, and I used to update the website. And I always made sure multiple people checked the Bank of England base rate changes and the various policy changes that happened, just for that peace of mind, because it was a very large company who dealt with a lot of mortgages. So you needed to get that right. And it's no different in 2026. And this is the checklist. So this is what I would say when you're looking to avoid hallucinations. So next time you're on a big project and you're generating lots of content, or you're doing a report, make sure, have you grounded it in data and facts and figures that you're comfortable with? Did you provide the sources? Make sure you feed it good, credible data. Constrain it, so set the scope and set limits on it in terms of what it does. Ask it to list assumptions. Ask it to say if it doesn't know. Ask it not to guess. And again, ask that step-by-step reasoning. How did it get from point A to point B? What were its assumptions? What were its sources? And then don't forget people. Make sure if you're working in a marketing department, you're doing a blog post or you're doing content for a product detail page, make sure it's checked by multiple people in the department, just like you would have with a direct mail piece back in the early noughties or the launch of a new website. You'd copy check it. It's similar to that. One other thing I haven't put in my slides, which I'm just going to mention now, which is relevant as well to add to your prompt, is setting a temperature to the prompt, especially if you're doing a factual document or something with something with facts and figures. You can do this thing to say in the prompt, say set temperature to 0.2. So that if you set it to 0.2, the large language model you're dealing will work in a more focused way. It'll be less creative, but it'll be more focused, so you can be more confident in its output if it's something that you want to make sure is 100% accurate. So that's another thing to consider as well. So, and the other thing, I'm just thinking another one that's come to mind now, is use the latest LLM. So as they move, they're iterating all the time. I still say to family, we're like at the Atari Pong stage of AI, generative AI at the moment. I still think it's improving at a staggering rate. And we're nowhere near the Call of Duty 7 version of AI at the moment. We're still very much in the early 80s in terms of where it's at in its evolution. And I think things like hallucinations, I think as time and quality, as people get more educated as well, I think the phenomenon of hallucinations will not be as bad. And I think you've still got to be careful. Still very much got to be careful. So I hope you found that useful. Drop me a note in the comments if you've got any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them, especially around the stuff I've done using generative AI for generating content, because that's something I do a lot with, and hence why I've done this video on hallucinations. Thank you very much.